Buffett, The Making of an American Capitalist, by Roger Lowenstein. Introduction. Imagine this. It's the early 1960s, and one of the most trusted companies in America, American Express, is in the middle of a nightmare. They own a warehouse in New Jersey where a slick operator, a man they call the Salad Oil King, has pulled off one of the biggest frauds in history. He filled giant tanks mostly with seawater, put a thin layer of valuable salad oil on top, and then used those tanks as collateral to borrow millions of dollars from banks. When the scheme collapses, the banks come to American Express holding worthless receipts for tanks of seawater. The scandal explodes. Wall Street panics. American Express stock plummets, falling by nearly half. Everyone is dumping the stock, convinced the company is ruined, that its reputation is shattered forever. The experts, the analysts, the big firms, they all say, sell. Get out now. But in Omaha, Nebraska, a young man in his early 30s does something strange. He doesn't just read the headlines. He goes out. He walks into restaurants and watches people pay for their dinners. He visits banks and travel agencies. And what he sees is that people are still using their American Express cards. They're still buying American Express travelers' checks. The scandal, as big as it was, hadn't broken the public's trust in the idea of American Express. While Wall Street was staring at the stock ticker, he was looking at human behavior. And he made a bet. A huge bet. He poured nearly half of his small investment partnership's money into the company that everyone else was throwing away. That young man, of course, was Warren Buffett. And that single decision, that moment of clarity in the middle of a panic, would become a defining chapter in the story of how a kid from Omaha, who started with nothing, became one of the wealthiest and most respected investors in the history of the world. Today, we're diving into the story of his life, as told in Roger Lowenstein's masterpiece biography, Buffett, The Making of an American Capitalist. This isn't just a book about making money. It's an American epic about character, about patience, and about a philosophy so simple, yet so powerful, that it turned the entire world of finance on its head. By the end of our time together, you won't just know what Warren Buffett did. You'll understand how he thinks. And that, I promise you, is a lesson worth more than any stock tip you'll ever get. Book summary. To understand Warren Buffett, you have to go back to the beginning, to a quiet, tree-lined street in Omaha, Nebraska. From the moment he was born, it was clear he was different. While other kids were playing with toys, young Warren was fascinated by numbers. Not just in a casual way. He was obsessed. He would sit on his front porch and write down the license plate numbers of passing cars, just to see which number patterns appeared most often. He'd open the newspaper and count the letters, filling scrapbooks with his findings. He memorized the populations of every major city in America. His friend Bob Russell would read a list of 10 cities, and Warren would spit back the populations, hitting every single one on the nose. Baseball scores, horse racing odds, every number was food for his mind. In church on Sundays, while others prayed, he would pass the time by calculating the lifespans of the composers who wrote the hymns. But it wasn't just numbers. It was numbers connected to money. His first prized possession was a nickel-coated money changer he proudly strapped to his belt. At 5 years old, he set up a gum stand on the sidewalk. Then he started selling 6-packs of Coca-Cola, which he bought from his grandfather's grocery store for 25 cents, and sold them door to door for a nickel a bottle, making a 5-cent profit on each pack. Every one of these early ventures had a purpose. He wasn't just trying to earn pocket money for a movie. He was building something. He once told a nurse, while sick in the hospital, that the numbers he was scribbling on a page represented his future capital. "I don't have much money now," he said cheerfully, "but someday I will and I'll have my picture in the paper." He told his friends, sitting on the fire escape at school, that he would be a millionaire by the time he was 30. And if he wasn't, he half joked, he would jump off the tallest building in Omaha. Where does a drive like that come from? Part of it came from his father, Howard Buffett. Howard was a stockbroker and later a congressman, a man of deep principles, fiercely independent and conservative. He drilled into his children a favorite maxim from the philosopher Ralph Waldo Emerson: "The great man is he who in the midst of the crowd keeps with perfect sweetness the independence of solitude." In other words, think for yourself. Don't follow the herd. Warren absorbed this lesson like a sponge. Howard was his hero, his best friend. He took young Warren to his brokerage office, where the boy would gaze at the stock certificates, mesmerized by the idea that these pieces of paper represented ownership in real businesses. But there was another side to his childhood, a darker motivation. His mother, Layla, was a woman of two faces. To the outside world, she was cheerful, intelligent, and lively. But at home, when her husband was away, she would fly into unpredictable rages, scolding and degrading her children for hours on end for the smallest imagined flaws. It was a storm of emotional criticism, and there was no escape. Warren's response was to retreat inward. He built an emotional fortress around himself. He learned not to fight back, to avoid conflict, and to keep his feelings locked away. He spent as much time as he could at his friends' houses, almost as if he were an orphan seeking refuge. His son Peter would later wonder if that relentless drive to get out of the house, to build his own world, was partly fueled by the urge to escape that turmoil. Whatever the source, his path was set early on. When he was just 11, he made his first stock market investment. He bought 3 shares of a company called City Service Preferred for $38 a share. He even convinced his sister Doris to buy 3 shares too. Immediately, the stock plunged to $27. Doris reminded him of it every day on the way to school. Warren felt terrible. He sweated it out, and when the stock recovered to $40, he sold, making his first $5 profit. It felt like a victory. But then he watched in agony as City Service soared to over $200 a share. It was his first, painful lesson in the most important virtue an investor can have: patience. He was charting his own path, reading every business book he could find. He devoured a book called 1,000 Ways to Make $1,000, a collection of stories about entrepreneurs who'd turned small ideas into fortunes. It was a revelation. It taught him to begin. Don't wait for the perfect plan. Just start. And he did. While still a teenager in Washington, D.C., where his father was serving in Congress, he built a paper route empire of nearly 500 customers a day, earning $175 a month, more than many of his teachers. He even figured out when his customers' magazine subscriptions were expiring by looking at their discarded mail, so he could show up at just the right time to sell them a renewal. With the money he saved, at just 14 years old, he bought a 40-acre farm in Nebraska. He and his friend Don Danley started the Wilson Coin-Operated Machine Company. They bought a used pinball machine for $25, fixed it up, and convinced a local barber to let them place it in his shop for a 50-50 split of the profits. At the end of the first day, they found $14 in the machine. Soon, they had machines in barbershops all over town, earning $50 a week. By the time he was ready for college, Warren already had over $5,000 saved up, a small fortune in those days. He told his father he didn't need to go to college. He already knew what he wanted to do. But his father insisted, and Warren grudgingly went to the Wharton School of Finance in Pennsylvania. He was bored. He felt he knew more than his professors, who were teaching theories from textbooks while he was out in the real world, making real money. After 2 years, he couldn't stand it anymore. He transferred back home to the University of Nebraska to finish his degree as quickly as possible. His sights were set on the next step, Harvard Business School. He was so confident he would get in. He even told his friend Jerry Orens to join him there. But then came the rejection. A short, dismissive interview in Chicago. They told him he was too young. He was only 19. He was crushed. For the first time, his meticulously planned life had hit a wall. His father urged him to apply to another graduate school, but Warren wasn't sure. Then, as he was thumbing through the course catalog for Columbia University, he saw two names that changed everything: Benjamin Graham and David Dodd. This was the moment his life pivoted. He had just read a new book by Graham called The Intelligent Investor. It wasn't just a book, it was a revelation. His housemate at the time said it was as if Warren had found a god. Graham and Dodd were the authors of Security Analysis, the Bible of the investing profession. And they were teaching at Columbia. He applied, got in, and headed to New York to study with the master. Up until this point, Buffett had been a brilliant but scattered operator. He chased tips, he studied charts, he looked for patterns, he was trying every system he could find to beat the market. But it was all guesswork. Benjamin Graham gave him a philosophy. He gave him a framework for thinking that was so powerful, so logical, and so perfectly suited to his independent mind that it would guide him for the rest of his life. So what was this revolutionary idea? It was incredibly simple. Graham taught that the stock market should be thought of not as a mysterious force, but as a business partner. A very moody, irrational business partner. He called this partner Mr. Market. Imagine you own a small piece of a private business, and every day, Mr. Market comes to your door. He tells you what he thinks your share is worth, and he offers to either buy you out at that price or sell you more. Some days, he's euphoric. He sees nothing but a rosy future and offers you a ridiculously high price. Other days, he's terrified. He sees nothing but trouble ahead and offers to sell you his shares for pennies on the dollar. Graham's point was this: you don't have to listen to him. Mr. Market is there to serve you, not to guide you. If he shows up in a panic and offers you a great business for a silly price, you take it. If he shows up in a euphoric mood and offers to buy your shares for more than they're worth, you sell. But you never, ever let his mood swings, his daily price quotes, determine how you feel about the underlying business. The true investor, Graham taught, doesn't care about the stock's daily fluctuations. He cares about the business's actual value. The second core idea was the margin of safety. This was the bedrock of Graham's entire philosophy. It meant you should only buy a stock when its market price is significantly below your calculation of its intrinsic value. It's like building a bridge and insisting it can hold 30,000 pounds, but then only driving 10,000-pound trucks across it. That gap, that cushion for error, is your margin of safety. It's what protects you from bad luck, from your own mistakes, and from the wild swings of Mr. Market. For Buffett, these ideas were like the Rosetta Stone. They turned the chaotic, emotional casino of the stock market into a logical, rational field of play. It meant he didn't have to predict the economy. He didn't have to guess what other people were thinking. He just had to do two things: figure out what a business was worth, and then wait patiently for the chance to buy it for a lot less. It was a philosophy that required not genius, but discipline, patience, and rationality. It was a game perfectly suited for the independent kid from Omaha. At Columbia, Buffett was the star pupil. Graham would pose a question to the class, and before he could even finish the sentence, Warren's hand would shoot into the air. He soaked up everything. He learned how to dissect a financial statement, how to spot a fraud, and how to find what Graham called cigar butts, unloved stocks that were tossed aside but still had a few valuable puffs left in them. He studied his professor's own investments. When he discovered Graham was the chairman of an obscure insurance company called Geico, he took a train to Washington, D.C. On a Saturday, found the office locked, and banged on the door until a janitor let him in. He found a lone executive, Lorimer Davidson, working on the 6th floor. For the next 4 hours, the 20-year-old student peppered the financial vice president with questions so intelligent and insightful that Davidson later said, "After 15 minutes, I knew I was talking to an extraordinary man." Buffett left convinced that Geico was a gold mine. He put most of his savings into it and made a handsome profit. He was putting Graham's principles into practice. When he graduated, he was the only student to ever receive an A+ from Graham. He made what he thought was an irresistible offer, to work for Graham's investment firm, Graham Newman, for free. Graham turned him down. In those days, Wall Street's Gentile firms were largely closed to Jews, and Graham preferred to save the few spots at his own firm for Jewish applicants. It was a shock to Buffett, a lesson in a world he didn't know. So, once again, he headed home to Omaha. He took a job as a stockbroker at his father's firm, Buffett Falk & Company. But he hated it. He hated trying to persuade people to buy things. It felt adversarial. He knew the goal wasn't just to earn a commission, it was to make his clients, and himself, rich. The only way to do that was to be the one making the decisions, not just giving advice. On the side, he taught an investment class at night at the University of Omaha. His students were doctors and businessmen, twice his age, and they snickered when this skinny, 21-year-old kid walked in. But then he started to talk about Graham. He spoke with such passion and clarity that they were mesmerized. It was here he first uttered one of his most famous lines, "I will tell you the secret of getting rich on Wall Street. You try to be greedy when others are fearful, and you try to be very fearful when others are greedy." During this time, he also found a partner for life. He began courting Susan Thompson, the bright, bubbly daughter of an Omaha minister. Susie was everything Warren wasn't: empathetic, outgoing, and deeply interested in people's feelings. At first, she was bored by his brain teasers and his talk of getting rich. So Warren took a different approach. He started courting her father. He would show up at the Thompson house every night with his ukulele and play music with Susie's dad, while Susie went out on dates with another guy. Eventually, her father's persistence, and Warren's own quirky charm, won her over. They married in 1952. Susie became the anchor of his life, the person who, as Warren would say, removed the thorns, one by one, smoothing his rough emotional edges and connecting him to the world outside of numbers and balance sheets. But he was still restless. He dreamed of working for his hero. He kept in touch with Graham, sending him stock ideas, anything to stay on his radar. Finally, in 1954, the call came. Graham's firm was now open to hiring a non-Jewish employee. He offered Buffett a job. Without even asking about the salary, Buffett was on the next plane to New York. He worked at Graham Newman for 2 years, absorbing everything he could. He was brilliant, a human calculator, faster at scanning financial statements and spotting opportunities than even Graham himself. He was, as one colleague put it, Graham exponential, but he also began to see the limits of his mentor's approach. Graham was so focused on finding statistically cheap cigar butts that he often overlooked great businesses. He mistrusted corporate managers and rarely wanted to get involved with the quality of a business itself. He was so cautious that as the market began to rise in the mid-1950s, he grew increasingly nervous, sitting on cash, waiting for another crash. Buffett was itching to do more. By 1956, he had saved up about $140,000. He was 25 years old, with a wife and young daughter. And he made a decision. He was tired of New York, tired of working for someone else. He was going home again. This time, for good. On May 1, 1956, working out of a small study in his rented house on Underwood Avenue in Omaha, he organized a small investment pool. 7 partners, family and friends, put up a combined $105,000. Buffett, the general partner, put in only $100 of his own. It was a tiny sum, but it was the beginning. Buffett Associates, Limited, was born. He was finally his own boss. He laid down a set of ground rules that were unheard of. He told his partners he would not tell them what stocks he was buying. He would report to them only once a year. They could add or withdraw money only on that one day, December 31st. Otherwise, their money was his to manage, with absolute control. He wasn't asking for their advice, he was asking for their trust. Drive. Edwin Davis, a prominent Omaha doctor who became an early investor, recalled the first time he met the young Buffett. "In comes this guy, egad? He looked like he was 18. He talked so very fast, but something about his quiet confidence, his clear-eyed logic, was convincing." Davis put in $100,000. In his first year, Buffett's portfolios gained 10%, while the Dow Industrials dropped by 8%. By the end of his third year, his partner's money had doubled. Word began to spread. This kid from Omaha was doing something special. He was still playing Ben Graham's game, but with his own style. He was more concentrated, more willing to make big bets. One of his first major investments was in a company called Sanborn Map, which had a dying map business but also a huge portfolio of stocks worth far more than the company's market price. It was a classic Graham play. Buffett bought up the stock, got himself on the board, and forced management to unlock the value for shareholders, making a 50% profit. But it was another investment that marked his true evolution. In the early 1960s, a scandal erupted around American Express. A subsidiary had been defrauded in the salad oil swindle, and the stock was in free fall. Wall Street was in a panic. But Buffett, as we know, looked past the panic. He saw that the company's core franchise, its powerful brand name and the trust people had in its travelers' checks and cards, was still intact. He couldn't measure that franchise on a balance sheet, but he knew it had immense value. This was a major leap beyond Graham's numbers-first approach. Buffett was now looking for great businesses with what he called a moat, a durable competitive advantage that protected them from competition. American Express had a moat. He invested 40% of his entire partnership in the stock, his biggest bet ever. Within a couple of years, the stock had risen 5-fold, and Buffett had made a fortune. He was developing a dual approach, on one hand, buying beaten-down, statistically cheap stocks like Dempster Mill, a failing farm equipment manufacturer. On the other hand, buying wonderful businesses with strong franchises, like American Express. It was the first approach that led him to a struggling textile mill in New Bedford, Massachusetts, called Berkshire Hathaway. In 1962, Berkshire was a classic cigar butt. It was trading for about $7.60 a share, but it had over $16 a share in working capital. It was a terrible business, in a dying industry, but it was cheap. Buffett started buying. He got on the board, hoping to convince the stubborn old New England management, led by a man named Seabury Stanton, to use the company's cash more wisely. Stanton kept closing mills and using the cash to buy back the company's stock. At one point, he made a verbal offer to buy back Buffett's shares at $11.50. But when the written offer came, Stanton had lowered it by 1/8 of a point. Buffett was furious. He felt he'd been cheated. Instead of selling, he started buying more stock, aggressively. By 1965, he had control. He fired Stanton and installed his own man, Ken Chase, to run the textile operations. It was an absolute accident that Berkshire Hathaway became his vehicle. He had bought it to make a quick profit, but a dispute over 12.5 cents a share changed history. He soon realized that the textile business was a black hole for capital. No matter how much money he poured in, it would never earn a good return. But it did generate some cash. And that cash, Buffett decided, would not be reinvested in looms and spindles. It would become the seed money for a new empire. Using Berkshire Hathaway as his holding company, he began to buy other businesses. First, he bought an insurance company, National Indemnity. This was the masterstroke. Insurance was the perfect business for an investor. It generated enormous amounts of cash up front in the form of premiums. This cash, known as float, didn't belong to Berkshire. It would eventually be paid out in claims, but in the meantime, Buffett could invest it for Berkshire's benefit. It was like having a giant, interest-free loan that renewed itself every year. With a float from insurance, he bought a bank in Illinois. He bought the Omaha Sun, a weekly newspaper. He bought See's Candy, a beloved California chocolate maker with a powerful brand name. Each of these was a good business that generated more cash. The cash from the candy company and the bank and the newspaper was then funneled back to Omaha, where Buffett would reinvest it. He was creating a powerful compounding machine. The dying textile mill had become the launchpad for a diversified conglomerate. As the 1960s roared on, Wall Street was in a speculative frenzy. A new breed of go-go fund managers were chasing hot stocks, jumping in and out of the market, trying to catch the latest trend. It was an environment of pure speculation, and Buffett hated it. He felt like he was playing in a game where the rules had changed, a game he didn't understand. His method was to buy businesses for the long term. Their method was to treat stocks like trading cards. In 1969, at the very peak of the bull market, with his partnership assets at over $100 million and his personal net worth at $25 million, he did something unthinkable. He quit. He wrote a letter to his partners and told them he was liquidating the partnership. He said, "I am not attuned to this market environment, and I don't want to spoil a decent record by trying to play a game I don't understand just so I can go out a hero." He returned their money, giving them the option to take their proportional shares in two of his controlled companies, Berkshire Hathaway and a retailer called Diversified. Many of them did. Buffett, now 39 years old, was effectively retired. But his retirement didn't last long. The go-go years ended in a brutal crash. From 1973 to 1974, the market collapsed. Stocks were cheap again. And Buffett felt that familiar itch. He told a reporter he felt like an oversexed guy in a whorehouse. He came roaring back, this time using Berkshire Hathaway as his primary investment vehicle. He bought a huge stake in the Washington Post, another dominant media franchise that was selling for a fraction of what its assets were worth. The Graham family, which controlled the paper, was terrified of this mysterious investor from Omaha. But Buffett charmed his way onto the board and became the trusted advisor and closest friend of its publisher, Katharine Graham. He helped her navigate strikes, business challenges, and the world of Wall Street, all while his investment grew from $10 million into hundreds of millions. Throughout this period, his thinking was being sharpened by his intellectual partner, Charlie Munger. Munger, a brilliant, opinionated, and deeply ethical lawyer from Omaha who had moved to Los Angeles, was even more skeptical of Wall Street than Buffett. He pushed Buffett away from Graham's cigar butts and toward buying wonderful businesses. "It's better to buy a wonderful company at a fair price," Munger would say, "than a fair company at a wonderful price." Their partnership was a meeting of minds. They spoke on the phone for hours, finishing each other's sentences. Munger became Buffett's alter ego, the abominable no-man who would challenge his ideas and keep him intellectually honest. By the 1980s, the Berkshire machine was in high gear. Buffett was now a billionaire. The annual meetings, once held in the company cafeteria for a handful of people, had become massive events, pilgrimages for thousands of shareholders who flocked to Omaha to hear the oracle speak. His annual letters to shareholders became must-read documents, filled with homespun wisdom, brilliant insights, and a level of candor unheard of in corporate America. He wrote about accounting, about management, about the follies of Wall Street, all in a clear, simple style that anyone could understand. He was not just an investor, he was a teacher. He continued to make huge, brilliant bets. He invested in Gillette, seeing the incredible power of its razor and blade franchise. He bought a massive stake in Salomon Brothers during a crisis, becoming its interim chairman and saving the firm from collapse. And then, in 1988, came what might be his greatest investment of all. For over 50 years, he had watched Coca-Cola blanket the globe. He knew its power. He knew its economics were incredible. You make a syrup for pennies, sell it for $1, and it's sold to people who are, in his words, addicts. The company had stumbled in the 70s, but under a new CEO, Roberto Goizueta, it was refocusing on its core global brand. Buffett saw that its international growth was about to explode. After the stock market crash of 1987, the stock became cheap. And Buffett pounced. Over several months, he invested over $1 billion, acquiring 7% of the company. At the time, analysts thought the stock was expensive. But Buffett saw a business with a moat as wide as an ocean, a brand that was irreplaceable, and a future of unstoppable growth. Within a few years, his billion-dollar investment had tripled. The story of Warren Buffett is the story of a man who built an empire by staying true to a few simple ideas. He never tried to be the smartest guy in the room, he just tried to be the most rational. He ignored the noise of the market and focused on the reality of the business. He sought out managers he could trust and then left them alone. He lived simply, worked constantly, and never, ever forgot that the first rule of the game was to avoid losing. In a world of fleeting trends and complex strategies, he held on to the timeless virtues of patience, discipline, and a deep-seated belief in the power of common sense. And in doing so, he didn't just get rich, he created a legacy that will be studied for generations to come. Commentary. When you strip away all the billions, all the famous deals, and all the legendary stories, what are we left with? What is the single most powerful lesson from the life of Warren Buffett? For me, it's this: success in investing, and perhaps in life, has less to do with a stratospheric IQ and more to do with temperament. It's about having the right emotional framework. Buffett himself says it best. He says you don't need to be a rocket scientist. In fact, he says, if you have an IQ over 130, you should probably give 30 points back. What you need is emotional stability. You need the ability to think for yourself and to tune out the roar of the crowd. Think about it. Every major investment he made, American Express during the salad oil crisis, the Washington Post during the 1974 market crash, Coca-Cola after the 1987 crash, was made when everyone else was consumed by fear. He wasn't smarter than everyone else. He was just more rational. He was greedy when others were fearful. He had the emotional discipline to act on what he knew, even when the entire world was telling him he was wrong. That discipline is built on a foundation of a few core principles that anyone, and I mean anyone, can apply. First, is the idea of the circle of competence. Buffett is famous for saying that you don't have to be an expert on every company, or even many. You only have to be able to evaluate companies within your own circle of competence. The size of that circle isn't important. Knowing its boundaries, however, is vital. For him, it might be insurance or newspapers or soft drinks. For you, it might be the local business you see every day, the technology you use, or the industry you work in. The point is to stick to what you understand. If you can't explain in a few simple sentences why a business is a great one, you have no business owning it. Second, always insist on a margin of safety. This is Ben Graham's most powerful lesson. Never pay full price. Always buy a business for significantly less than you think it's worth. This isn't just about getting a bargain, it's about protecting yourself. It's the cushion that saves you when you make a mistake, when the economy turns, or when bad luck strikes. It's the difference between investing and speculating. And third, think of a stock as a piece of a business, not a blip on a screen. Before you buy anything, ask yourself one simple question: would I be comfortable owning this entire business if the stock market were to shut down for the next 10 years? If the answer is no, don't buy it. This mindset forces you to focus on the long-term economics of the business itself, its moat, its management, its earning power, rather than getting caught up in the short-term noise of the market. These ideas are not complex. They are, in fact, incredibly simple. But they are not easy. They require a patience and a discipline that is rare in a world that craves instant gratification. Buffett's true genius isn't in his ability to pick stocks, it's in his ability to wait. To sit for years with cash, doing nothing, while he waits for the perfect pitch. And then, when that pitch comes, to swing with everything he's got. That is the ultimate lesson of his life. That in a world that is always shouting, true wisdom comes from the quiet confidence to trust your own judgment. To have the independence of mind to stand apart from the crowd. And to understand that the real game is not about being the smartest, but about being the most rational, the most patient, and the most disciplined. That was the book summary of Buffett, The Making of an American Capitalist by Roger Lowenstein. We've journeyed through the major milestones of his life today, but I'll be honest with you, a summary can only scratch the surface. The real magic happens when you read the book for yourself. It's in the quiet moments, when a particular story or a simple turn of phrase hits you in a way you didn't expect. This summary is designed to give you a compass, to help you decide if this story is worth your time. If anything we've talked about has sparked something in you, I encourage you to grab a copy. Reading it isn't just about learning finance, it's an experience that can genuinely change the way you see business, investing, and even yourself. The link to the book is in the description below. Also, if you found this summary valuable, please hit that like button and subscribe to our channel. It tells us we're on the right track, and it ensures you won't miss our next journey into another life-changing book from the world's most successful minds. Let's keep learning and growing together.